The FBI said it was investigating what appears to be a second attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The Secret Service fired at an armed man at Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida on Sunday, just 2 months after he was wounded by a bullet in Butler, Pennsylvania. Trump was on the golf course just a few hundred yards away when Secret Service personnel spotted a person who was concealed in the bushes, and they immediately opened fire at him. The suspect fled the scene in a vehicle. He was taken into custody later at a traffic stop. He had a rifle with a scope, which was recovered from the bushes, along with a camera and 2 backpacks. It was not yet clear whether the suspect had indeed fired any shots before the Secret Service shot at him. U.S. law enforcement officials have identified the suspect as Ryan Wesley Ruth of Hawaii. Previously, Ruth had expressed a desire to fight and die in Ukraine. His posts on the social media site X have revealed a flair for violent rhetoric in the weeks after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. This is what he posted at that time, and I quote, "I'm willing to fly to Krakow and go to the border of Ukraine to volunteer and fight and die," unquote. Ruth is a former roofing contractor from North Carolina. He was interviewed by the New York Times in 2023 for an article about Americans volunteering to aid the war effort in Ukraine. Ruth, who has no military experience, said he had traveled to Ukraine right after Russia's invasion, and he wanted to recruit Afghan soldiers to fight against Russia in Ukraine. Back at the golf course, Trump had been playing golf with his friend and campaign donor, real estate investor Steve Witkoff, around 1:30 in the afternoon when the gunshots rang out. Trump was between the 5th and 6th holes, and Secret Service agents were traveling 1 hole ahead of him. They were on the lookout for potential threats on the course. An agent had spotted the barrel of a semi-automatic rifle poking through the bushes. The agent then opened fire on the suspect, who escaped in his car before he was caught out later by the police. Vice President Kamala Harris, and the person who's challenging Donald Trump for the presidential elections in November, she put out a statement. She said she was deeply disturbed by what the FBI said was a second assassination attempt on Trump after the previous one back in July. She condemned the political violence, according to the statement that was put out by the White House Sunday night. Even though Secret Service agents managed to thwart this threat very quickly, this episode does raise new questions about the agency's ability to protect candidates in its charge, particularly Donald Trump. The Secret Service significantly increased Trump's protective detail after coming under intense criticism following the first attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania, that happened on the 13th of July. The increased security detail included additional agents as well as enhanced on-ground intelligence. But both of it seems to have come short over what happened this weekend at Trump's golf course. In fact, after the first assassination attempt, the then Secret Service chief got into a lot of trouble with her apparent lack of ability to defend what happened, and also to try and get to the bottom of how a former president who was very much within the protection of the security service, the Secret Service, how he had a bullet grazing past his ear. Eventually, she had to step down because of all the blowback. Again, the second time in Florida at the golf course that happened on Sunday, the fact that a gunman was able to get a semi-automatic rifle with a telescopic sight so close to the former president, just about 300 to 500 yards away, underscored how many urgent problems are still unanswered and unresolved when it comes to Trump's security. What it also shows is how difficult it is for the Secret Service to respond to an unpredictable and an increasingly violent and volatile political environment, an environment which Trump himself had a role in shaping. As in Pennsylvania during the first shooting back in July, the biggest issues surrounding Trump's protection seem to involve securing the protective perimeter of a targeted site. In the Florida instance, for example, it was a private property. It was a golf course owned by Trump himself, and yet the perimeter was not fully secured. Trump still retains a protective detail which is smaller than the one that is given to a sitting president. That in many ways limits the kind of protections that the Secret Service and their local partners can provide to Donald Trump. At this level that Trump is in right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was the sitting president, then they would have had the entire golf course surrounded. There would have been greater scrutiny of the people who were allowed to enter such a premises, even if it was a private one. The fact that an ordinary person was able to enter the golf course with a semi-automatic rifle, a scope, and 2 backpacks unchecked is a serious question mark over security. But because he's not a sitting president, the security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems where it is possible for them to best secure him to the extent that they can. How this second shooting will play out on the rest of the campaign, that remains to be seen. It is unlikely that Trump would get the same kind of bump that he had in the polls right after the first shooting in Pennsylvania back in July. At that time, the shooting was soon followed by the Republican National Convention, and Trump, of course, appeared there with a bandaged ear. He came across as a larger-than-life figure who procured the sympathy of even those people who may not have been his ardent supporters. Trump, with his blood-soaked ear, pumping his fist in the air, asking his supporters to fight, came to be one of the defining images of the campaign up until then. But then, a lot has changed since then. Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee. She managed to quickly rally both the leadership and the rank and file of the Democratic Party. And just last week, she put Trump on the mat, beat him squarely in the first and perhaps only debate of this campaign season. But even without a Trump bump post his second hit at his Florida golf course, it will harden the positions of his own supporters. Whether or not that will foment sympathy for Trump beyond his hardcore MAGA base, that still remains in doubt. And right now, the biggest challenge for the Trump-Vance campaign is to extend their likability, to extend their support base to those who are outside the hardcore MAGA base, which seems to be a problem that Trump is stuck with. And unless there is significant sympathy in the aftermath of the second assassination attempt, that is going to be hard to change between now and November.